Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 28 of the Ecce textbook. So at this point you've made it through the first book of Ecce Romani, so congratulations, you should be proud of that accomplishment. It's been a lot of words you've seen, a lot of different grammar terms, a lot of structures, so you've made it through, which is impressive, and you should feel pretty good about where you are in your Latin career at this point. So now that you've made it to the Ecce 2 book, the biggest difference between Ecce 1 and Ecce 2 is you're going to get more advanced parts of the language. It's going to become a little bit more abstract, and it's going to start to test what you know about your English grammar, but you don't want to get bogged down in the grammar terminology or too much in the weeds on the grammar. You want to remember that you should be reading, right? The more that you read, the more you practice, the better off you're going to be, and you're going to learn a lot of these structures and a lot of the grammar just by reading and practicing without necessarily needing to sit down and memorize a million charts over and over again. But in this part of the book, you've gone from more concrete stuff in Ecce 1, right? A lot of verb endings and noun endings, so you should feel pretty comfortable with those through repeated practice. But now you're going to get more abstract. You're going to get into things like clauses in this chapter, relative clauses, the subjunctive mood, passive voice. It just becomes a little bit more advanced, but keep taking it one bit at a time, keep practicing. And, you know, if these videos help, hopefully it kind of guides you through as you get into more complicated Latin and you can feel comfortable with what you're doing, because you are progressing at a good rate and you're going to start getting closer and closer to being able to do more original Latin authors, which is really the goal of what we're after here. So in this video, like I said, we're going to walk through chapter 28. The first thing you want to do is make sure you have the vocab under control and memorized. So it's not a big vocab list for chapter 28. So it shouldn't be anything too crazy to do. But once you have that under control, go back, read through the grammar, right? And one last note on the vocab, you should always be updating your previous vocab too and keeping it fresh in your mind. You've learned hundreds of different words in Ecce Romani 1, and a lot of them don't get repeated enough to really stick. So you want to go back and read as much Latin as you can, even if you have to go outside of Ecce Romani, read other things, or just go back and reread the stories so you can just get the vocab practice of reading and the repetition, because there's a lot of words that you've seen and it can be tricky to memorize them. So the more you do doing old vocab, the better off you're going to be now that you're in the Ecce 2 textbook. Like I was saying, the grammar, read through the notes. Feel free to watch my 28 grammar video, whatever you have to do to get relative clauses under control. They're not a particularly difficult idea, but they are a little bit tricky. It's going to kind of tap into your grammar knowledge and understanding of English grammar. But again, you don't have to get too in the weeds on this. You can learn a lot of it just by practicing and reading and doing a lot of repetition with the Latin. So we're going to start there in this video, and then we're going to dive into the actual story. You want to remember, find a partner in class, find anyone that can read this to you and that you can read it back to them, the story. By reading it aloud, you're practicing your pronunciation, right? It's going to help a ton and let you catch a lot of the grammatical structures here just by reading it. And by listening, that's another key skill. The more you hear the Latin, the more you're going to hear the patterns and catch how the words work together. It's really important that you're not shutting yourself off to those two different ways of learning, right? Speaking and listening. So make sure you're doing that. So to dive in on chapter 28, we're going to take a look at relative clauses, a little review of the grammar, just so you can understand what's happening in this story. So you want to remember, a clause is part of a sentence. It's got a subject and a verb. We organize them into what we call the main clause. Sometimes this is called the independent clause in English class. But again, don't get too bogged down in the grammar. The main clause is the most important part of the sentence. You could take it out of the sentence and it would stand on its own as a complete thought. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute with examples. Then we have what we call subordinate clauses. These are things you learned back in chapter 20, the doom clauses, right? These are added information about the main clause, but they don't work as complete thoughts on their own. So what do I mean by that? Well, in English, if you were to say to someone, while I was eating, the raccoon attacked me, right? This is one of the examples of a while clause, a doom subordinate clause from chapter 20. While I was eating is a subordinate clause. It can't stand on its own. You can't walk up to someone and say, while I was eating. It feels like something's missing, right? The raccoon attacked me is the main clause. That's the key idea, and it can stand alone as its own sentence. You could just say to someone, the raccoon attacked me. While I was eating is giving you more information about what was the background, what was going on right before or while the raccoon attacked you, right? That's the main clause. That's the most important part. So a relative clause is just another type of subordinate clause, right? So in other words, they're parts of a sentence that give more information about the main clause, the main kind of idea of the sentence. And they're descriptive, right? You're giving more information. So the first sentence you ever saw, I believe it's the first line of chapter 1 in Ecce Romani, is Cornelia est puella Romana, quae in Italia habitat. This is a relative clause, quae in Italia habitat. The main idea is Cornelia is a Roman girl. The subordinate or relative clause is who lives in Italy. It's not its own thought. It's describing Cornelia. It's giving you more information about her. She's not just any Roman girl. She's a Roman girl who lives in Italy. This is what we call a relative clause. It's giving more information about someone or something in the main clause. So if we continue thinking about relative clauses, the noun or pronoun in the main clause that we're giving more information about is called the antecedent. It's a little technical, right? A little grammar term, but you can figure it out. It literally means to go before in Latin, or it comes from that root. So if we go back to that sentence I gave you of Cornelia est puella Romana, quae in Italia habitat. Quae is our relative pronoun. It's setting off the relative clause, who lives in Italy. So you want to ask yourself, well, who am I describing here? When I say who lives in Italy, who's the person who lives in Italy? It's Cornelia, right? The Roman girl. Either one of these you can consider the antecedent, because Cornelia and Puella Romana are equivalent to each other. But that's the person I'm giving more information about. So you can say Cornelia is the antecedent of quae. Right? And the idea of relative clauses is they let you say things that are more complicated, your sentences. It avoids repetition. So if I didn't use a relative pronoun here, or a relative clause, I'd have to say Cornelia is a Roman girl, Cornelia lives in Italy. It's repetitive and it's short, choppy sentences. It's not as good, right? So we want to kind of make it a little more complicated by saying Cornelia is a Roman girl who lives in Italy. I'm basically replacing the pronoun Cornelia, the name Cornelia, with a relative pronoun, right? Who? It's referring to Cornelia. So that's the idea of relative clauses. And again, you can kind of go through and look at my grammar video or chapter 28, and there's more detail here. But we translate them as either who or whom when we're talking about people. In this case, in the sentence I gave you here, quae is who, right? Because it's referring to a person, Cornelia. Or you could say which or that if I'm referring to things. So it depends on kind of what your antecedent is. This is the chart of the relative pronouns. Feel free to memorize it. Again, you can learn a lot of this just by practicing. But one thing I would point out is, particularly in the plural, the relative pronouns are actually pretty easy to remember because they're using our noun endings. So if you look at the masculine plural, the stem is QU, and then you add on E, orum, is, os, is. Here we have E, orum, ibus, os, ibus. It's pretty close to the same idea as our noun ending chart. So it should look really familiar. Same thing with the feminine. I, arum, ibus, as, ibus. It's very close to first declension nouns. So when you look at this chart, you start to catch some patterns of things that look familiar. It'll help you if you have to memorize these. But like I said, it's probably better just to read through the story and just get a lot of practice. You'll memorize it by doing that. Another thing you want to remember, the relative pronoun has to match its antecedent in gender and number, not case. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the same case. This is where there's a difference. We've been learning about, adjectives and matching with case, number, gender. Case is something different when it comes to a relative pronoun. So the case of the relative pronoun depends on what it's doing in its own clause. So in other words, is it a subject? Is it a direct object? What's it doing? So if we look at these three examples in the bottom, you can say, I see the girl who is happy. I see the girl whom I saw yesterday, and I see the girl whose house is nearby. Who, whom, and whose are all relative pronouns. They're setting off relative clauses, and they're all describing the girl. So every one of these is going to be feminine and singular. That's the gender and number of the girl, right? It would be puellam if we were looking at Latin. But the case is different. So if you look in the first example, who is happy? That's a subject. Who is happy? It would be nominative. In the second example, whom I saw yesterday. Whom is not the subject, right? I'm not saying whom saw. I'm saying I saw whom. Right? In other words, I saw the girl. It's accusative, which is why we say whom in English, and it would have to be accusative in Latin. The last one is showing possession, whose house, right? It's not a subject. It's saying who the house belongs to, right? So it would be genitive in Latin, whose. So this is a quick example just to show you overall how we use relative pronouns and kind of what they look like. Again, you want to dive into the actual grammar of the textbook to really get a good sense of it. This is just more to be a refresher so you can spot them, and I'll point them out as we go through the chapter story. So at this point, you should be ready to go for the chapter 28 story. And it starts with mane erat. It was early in the morning, right? Early in the day. You have Aurelia in cubiculo sedebat. So Aurelia, my subject, was sitting, right? There's an imperfect verb, in cubiculo, in her bedroom, right? And again, cubiculo is ablative because I'm saying she's inside the bedroom. Then you have crines eius curabant duae anculae, quarum alter speculum tenebat, altera crines pectebat. So here we have our first relative clause in a sentence. We have crines eius curabant. That's not the subject because we're not saying the hair was taking care of something. We're saying they were taking care of her hair, right? Crines eius, her hair, meaning Aurelia's hair. The subject is in red here, duae anculae. So two slave women were taking care of her hair, meaning they were kind of helping her out in the morning. Then we have quarum. That's our relative pronoun. It's genitive. So you're saying of whom, right? The subject is alter. So you're saying one, tenebat, was holding the speculum, the mirror. So of whom, I'm saying of these two slave women, of whom one was holding the mirror. Another way to think about this is to think a relative pronoun, quorum, is replacing the antecedent, in this case, the two slave women. So if I put the word or the phrase, the two slave women, back into the relative clause where quorum starts, I'd be saying one of the two slave women, right? Alter, and you have to say duarum ancillarum, of the two slave women. So if you think of it that way, you can understand why quorum is genitive here. The antecedent is two slave women, it's feminine plural, and in its own clause, right, from quorum to tenebat, what is quorum doing? Well, I'm saying one of whom, right? One of the two slave women is what I'm saying. It's genitive, right? So I'm saying out of these two slave women, one, tenebat speculum, one was holding the mirror. Altera, the other, pectebat crines, was combing the hair. So I'm explaining how the two slave women were taking care of Aurelia's hair. So just to repeat that sentence, we're saying the two slave women were taking care of her hair, of whom, meaning of the two slave women, one was holding the mirror, the other was combing her hair. Then we have Phrygia, quae crines negligenter pectebat, dominam vexabat. So Phrygia, one of the slave women, right? And again, relative clause here. We have quae to pectebat. Quae is setting off the relative clause. Quae is referring to Phrygia. Again, Phrygia is feminine and singular, so quae is feminine singular. But in its own sentence, I'm saying Phrygia, who was combing, she's the subject. So quae is nominative singular feminine here. Because I'm saying Phrygia, who was combing the hair, the crines, negligenter, carelessly, right? I'm giving you more information about the slave and what she was doing. So Phrygia, who was combing the hair carelessly, side thought, dominam vexabat, was annoying her mistress, right? And again, the idea here is the relative clause you could take out of this sentence and it would still make sense. Phrygia was annoying her mistress, right? That's a perfectly normal sentence. I'm giving you more information. I'm saying Phrygia, who, oh, by the way, was combing the hair carelessly. It's descriptive, right? That's how these relative clauses work. So she was annoying her mistress. Syra, quod manus tremebat, speculum non bene tenebat. So Syra, because her hand, her manus tremebat, was shaking, right, was trembling, non bene tenebat, she was not holding, non tenebat, she was not holding well, bene, the mirror. Or you could say she was not holding the mirror well. So Syra has her hand shaking, and she's not holding the mirror very well. And Phrygia, the other slave woman, is combing the hair carelessly, right? So they're not doing a good job. Aurelia igitur negligentia earum vexata, subito, quam negligentes estis clamavit. So Aurelia is my subject. Aurelia, therefore, igitur, she's described as vexata. So Aurelia is annoyed, right? Annoyed by what? We need an ablative to say what she's annoyed by. It's negligentia with the long A. By the carelessness, earum, of them, meaning of the two slave women. So you could almost say annoyed by their carelessness, or literally annoyed by the carelessness of them. Suddenly, and again, notice how earum is feminine because I'm referring to the two slave women. Suddenly, clamavit, she shouted. Again, perfect tense. You can tell by the V in the middle of it. So she shouted, quam negligentes, how careless you all are, estis. And again, negligentes is plural because I'm referring to the two slave women. So she shouts at them, basically saying, you all are careless, right? She says, abite, vocate Corneliam. So abite is a plural command. She says, go away. Right? Plural positive imperative. You can tell by the TE. Abire means to go away. Abite is the command form. So she's yelling at them saying, go away, go away. Then she gives them another command, vocate. It comes from vocare, which means to call. She says, call Cornelia. She's telling both of them to call, right? Not just one. The TE means both. So she's telling them both to call Cornelia. And she says, ea mecum in urbem ducere volo. So volo, I want, ducere, to lead. It's a complementary infinitive. I want to lead eam, her. It's feminine accusative. It's referring to Cornelia. I want to lead her, mecum, with me, is ablative here. The may should be purple here. Or pink. It's ablative. She says, I want to lead her with me, or take her with me, you could almost say, in urbem, into the city. And notice how urbem is accusative because it's showing motion into something. They're already inside Rome. It really is meaning here like down into the city itself is kind of the idea of the streets, right? So it's got accusative here because it's showing that motion into something. So this first paragraph is all about how the slave women are being lazy and they're not doing a very good job taking care of Aurelia's hair, which you learn from the culture is a bad idea to annoy your mistress. It's not going to end well. So now we can continue on, and we have statim exierunt anculae. So statim, immediately, the anculae, there's my subject, the slave woman, the two of them, exierunt, perfect tense, they exited, they left, right? Exi is the third principal part of exire, to go out, and the erunt ending gives it away as being perfect third person plural. So they left, right? Immediately they left. Then we have mox in cubiculum ineat Cornelia. Curme vocavisti mater. So soon, Cornelia, there's our subject. In it means she came in, is the idea. Into the bedroom. So she entered, you could almost say, into the bedroom, but it's perfect tense. She entered into the bedroom, and she says, Curme vocavisti, why did you call? It's vocare. The third principal part is vocavi, so that's why the V is there, perfect tense. And the isti is second person singular. She's talking to her mother. She's talking to one person. So she says, why did you call me, mother? Right? Why am I here? Basically the idea. Mater is vocative because that's who she's talking to. And Aurelia responded. So Aurelia responded. And she says, Pater tuus amicos quostam in quibus sunt senatoris praeclari ad cenam hodie invitave. So your father, pater tuus, that's the subject. Your father, again, tuus is that possessive adjective, right, that we learned last chapter. Your father. The verb here, the main verb is all the way at the end, invitave. He invited hodie today. Amicos quostam. Quostam is that indefinite adjective, means certain or some. Amicos is friends. There's our plural direct object. So your father invited today some friends. Then we have the relative clause, the side note. We have in quibus. Quibus is our relative pronoun. It's referring to the friends, right? But notice that amicos, right? Amicos quostam is accusative. Quibus is ablative, which is totally fine. The cases do not need to match. Remember, the gender and number match. So quibus and amicos are both masculine plural. So why is in quibus ablative here? It's because you're saying among whom, meaning in those friends, right? In that group of friends, sunt, there are senatores praeclari, famous or distinguished senators. So in quibus is because you're trying to show that idea of in or among those friends, there are certain, some of them are distinguished senators, right? So if you put it all together, you're saying your father invited to dinner certain friends among whom there are, sunt, famous senators, and he invited them ad cenam, to dinner today, or tonight, you could say, however you want to put it. But the dinner would start in the afternoon, so hodie makes sense here. So he invited them to dinner. Then we have porcum servus jam emet, sed ego in animo habeo ipsa in urbem ire ad mercatorum quondam, cuius taberna non procolabest, nam glires optimos ille vendere sole. So if we take that long sentence apart, the first part is porcum servus jam emet. So the slave, right, or a slave, already bought emet, right, the porcum, the pig, right? So she's saying, I've already sent off a slave to buy a pig, and you'll learn about who that slave is in a couple chapters, right? So she sent someone to go buy the pig. But ego, I have in mind, it's present tense, in animo habeo, I have habeo in mind. It means I intend to do something. Literally, I have in mind, but I intend. To do what? Ire, to go. And ipsa here means I myself, right? It's that intensifier. So I myself have in mind to go into the city, in urbem. Where is she going? Ad mercatorum quondam, to a certain merchant. Again, that indefinite adjective, to some merchant or a certain merchant. Then we have our relative clause here, cuius, right, is the relative pronoun. It's setting off this idea that gives more information about the merchant. It's the merchant, cuius, whose, right, whose taberna, whose shop. It's genitive. What you're literally saying is the shop of him, right, or of who. So when you put that together, you get whose. It's showing possession. It's his shop. So to a certain merchant whose shop is not far away, non procolabest. So she's going to a merchant. Why? Well, it tells you, nam, because ille, he, that one literally, but it means he, the merchant. So he is accustomed to selling. Solet, he is accustomed, vendere, to sell. Right, or he usually sells, you could say, or he's accustomed to selling glires optimos, the best dormice. This is what she wants. This delicacy, the glires are a delicacy for kind of upper class Romans eating the dormice, and this guy has the best ones. So she wants to go to this guy to get a special delicacy that she's going to serve at this dinner. And she finishes by saying, si tu vis me comire, me in atrio expecta, intereas servos ubebos celas ad januam fere. So she says, if you want, C2, there's our subject, if you wish, vis means wish or want. So if you want, ire, make whom, to go with me, right? There's make whom with me, ablative. She says, expecta, so look for me is kind of the idea. Me expecta. Expectare means to look out for or wait for. This is the command form, the singular positive imperative. So you drop the re and you just leave it alone, expecta. So she says, if you want to go with me, wait for me, right? Expecta me, or look for me in atrio, in the atrium. So she says, go to the atrium, wait for me, and we'll go together. Interea, meanwhile, right? Eubebo, I will order. Again, the bo gives it away as being future tense. So she says, I will order the slaves. And remember, whenever you're dealing with ordering, you order someone to do something. So it says, I will order the slaves to do what? Fere, to bring or to carry. To bring what? The selas, the chairs. These are basically, I think the book describes them as sedan chairs. They're basically something you'd be carried in. So wealthy Romans, you're not going to go walking through the city if you can afford it. So you would have slaves who carry you on this chair through the city, so you're not walking, on your own through the dirty city. That's what's going on here. So she says, I'll order the slaves to bring the selas ad Ianuum, to the door, right? So she's saying, if you want to come with me, meet me there. I'll tell the slaves to hurry up, and they'll carry us to this merchant, and we'll get what we need for the dinner. So that's the end of the chapter 28 story. It's not particularly long, but it does have a decent amount of repetitions on relative pronouns and relative clauses. So that's what you want to focus on. Look for words like qui, cuius, quibus, whatever you see, and think about how they work in the sentence. They're giving you more information about the antecedent. That's what they're doing here. So keep practicing them. Otherwise, nothing too complicated about this story. So hopefully it felt pretty good to translate. Like I said, there's not a ton of new vocab, and it's not a particularly long story. So just keep at it. Keep working your way through. If you get stuck on anything involving the grammar, go back, review it, and try reading the story again. But you should leave in a pretty good place feeling like you've got this under control and that it makes sense. If you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll help you however I can. But otherwise, keep at it. Keep reading, keep translating and practicing, and you should get better as you go.